Hello, my name is Joni Hendricks. Today, I will be talking to you about educational theory. Learning is the process in which we actively integrate new knowledge with what we already know. We store knowledge in our long-term memory so that we may recall and apply it when needed. The cognitive load theory is a learning model which was developed to explain the ways that we learn. Our minds process information in our working memory to store in our long-term memory. Our long-term memory is where we store knowledge and is essentially unlimited. Our long-term memory keeps information in chunks and patterns so that we can recall what we've learned. Our working memory has a very limited amount of storage and can only hold information for short amounts of time. If the resources of our working memory are exceeded, then learning is ineffective. In our working memory, we filter new information and construct schemas or files to transfer knowledge into our long-term memory. The working memory processes three different types of cognitive load. Extraneous cognitive load, which is unnecessary information. Intrinsic cognitive load, which is essential information. And germane cognitive load, which is used to facilitate learning. To aid the learning process, instructional designers should review the material and reduce or eliminate extraneous cognitive load. Building on the cognitive load theory, the cognitive theory of multimedia learning recognizes that information comes in two different forms, auditory and visual. Our minds learn more deeply when new information is presented in both auditory and visual formats. The use of images and words are presented to our sensory memory. The sensory memory then transfers the information to our working memory, where in the working memory manipulates the knowledge of the sounds and the images into new schemas. These schemas are then transferred into our long-term memory. Similar to the cognitive load theory, there are three types of cognitive capacity demands used as our mind manipulates information in our working memory. Extraneous processing, or irrelevant information. Essential processing, or selecting relevant information. And generative processing, or reorganizing information and integrating it with long-term memory. Instructional designers create multimedia learning using three assumptions. The first is that learners have dual channels. We process multimedia information in two separate channels. Visual information is processed in the visual channel, and auditory information is processed in the auditory channel. However, when we are able to concentrate and devote our resources to learning, we can use both channels simultaneously. An example of this is when we are reading and make a mental image of the written material. The second assumption is the limited capacity assumption. We have a limited amount of information that we can process in each channel at a given time. We use a selection method to determine which information is retained. We also use techniques like creating patterns and chunking data to help us retain information. The final assumption is the active processing assumption. We use our knowledge to integrate new information to learn by paying attention to details and organizing this new information in a way that makes sense to us. In all, the cognitive load theory and the cognitive theory of multimedia learning are similar. Learners follow the same basic methods of assessing, organizing, and integrating new learning into their working memory to transfer relevant information into their long-term memory. The difference between the theories is that the cognitive theory of multimedia learning focuses on the material type and goes further by looking at the cognitive processing of auditory and visual channels of the mind. Providing information in an easy-to-understand, clear, and concise manner helps learners focus their attention and actively learn the material. Instructional designers use instructional principles to help reduce cognitive load. I'd like to discuss 3 of these principles with you now. The signaling principle is used to help learners through the selection phase of the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. This is done by directing the learner's attention to significant material. The use of arrows, bold text, underlining, circling, changing the font color, adding special effects such as flashing words and shapes that can be clicked on for additional information or instruction are examples of signaling. In audio recordings, the use of intonation brings the listener's focus to essential material and essential points. In today's fast-paced, instant access, multitasking world, people are apt to skim material. The use of signals ensures that the learner's attention will be directed to the keywords and phrases. This helps them select the important information to process. Similar to the signaling principle, the spatial contiguity principle helps focus students' attention by reducing their visual search for material and thus reducing extraneous cognitive load. Instructional designers use the spatial contiguity principle to keep relevant information close together. People learn better when corresponding words and pictures are presented near each other on the page or computer screen. This example demonstrates the spatial contiguity principle. It would certainly be easier to learn the princesses with their names next to them. The coherence principle removes distractions by taking away interesting but not relevant information, pictures, stories, etc. The learner can concentrate on the important material. In this example, removing the images of the flowers and the child would help the reader focus on the lesson. Instructional designers should carefully review each lesson and eliminate irrelevant information. Research has shown that certain techniques also aid the learning process. Adults and children often hold misconceptions. Refutation text challenges these misconceptions. Refutation contains 2 components, the statement of misconception and an explanation refuting the misconception with proof. At the time of Columbus, a common misconception believed by many people was that the earth was flat. They felt that Columbus's ships would fall off the end of the earth. However, we know that this is not true. We know that the earth is round and that ships can actually sail around the world. Let me give you a more current example. I work in the Institutional Research Office at a public university. I feel that a common misconception is that data is static. However, data can actually change depending on the way the question is asked and viewed. Our university claims to have a diverse student body. Statistically speaking, the student body consists of approximately 75% Caucasian students, 14% African American students, 4% Hispanic students, and so on. Many people would consider this not to be a diverse student body. However, in reality, based on the race distribution in the surrounding counties of the university, the student body is much more diverse. Research has shown that the use of refutation helps to increase the student's learning. Refutation is similar to the signaling principle as it points out or cues the learner to misconceptions. Refutation is also similar to the coherence principle. By removing misconceptions, it reduces cognitive load. So, what methods can be used by instructional designers to improve course design and optimize learning? One of the most important aspects is to reduce extraneous cognitive load. This can be done by using instructional principles like the signaling principle and guiding the student's focus to key elements. The spatial contiguity principle can be used to focus the student's attention by reducing their visual search for material. The coherence principle can be used to remove distractions. And refutation texts can be used to dispel any misconceptions. In all, instructional designers should carefully review each lesson and remove extraneous cognitive load. Thank you for your attention.